So, patience. Ever feel like it's just, one of those things some people are just born with, like some exclusive club, and we didn't get the invitation.
Right. You're either a patient person or you're not. But these sources you brought in, they really dig into that and kind of turn it on its head, don't they?
Totally. One even compared it to like tackling a huge project, which I thought was kind of brilliant, honestly.
Because it's not just about, like, toughing it out, is it? Every project, whether it's building a house or, I don't know, learning a new language, it has its own timeline.
Exactly. And instead of are we there yet, it becomes about, like one source put it, knowing how many shovels of dirt it takes, which I just love that visual.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Because it shifts your focus. Suddenly you're not just stewing in that frustrated place of not there yet. You're actually maybe even a little bit curious about the process.
Totally. Like, okay, how many more shovels to go? What can I learn while I'm digging? Speaking of which, that stock market crash example,
Yeah. Talk about a real-world application. If you're not familiar, the source talks about how understanding that the market moves in these cycles, that's key to not freaking out every time there's a dip.
Which I'll admit, I've totally done that. Panicked selling, the whole 9 yards. But
Yeah.
when you think about it as these natural upswings and downturns, it's less about, oh my gosh, the sky is falling,
Right.
and more about,
Riding it out.
exactly. And that long-term view seems to be a big part of this whole patience thing, doesn't it? There is this term in one of the sources, time preference.
Oh, that's a fascinating one. It gets at how much we, in any given moment, value instant gratification versus something we have to wait for. Like, think about investing money.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You could blow it all on something fun right now, or you could be patient, invest it wisely, and potentially have way more down the line.
So patience, it's almost like an investment in itself?
In a way, absolutely. You're delaying that immediate reward for something potentially even better later on. And that actually segues perfectly into another huge aspect of this, how intertwined patience is with what's going on in our own minds.
Oh, yeah, there were some really thought-provoking points about that. One source even said, the thoughts that pass through our heads alter our emotional state. Which, like,
It's so true, though, isn't it?
yeah, it is. If we're constantly telling ourselves, this is taking forever, or I can't stand this another minute, well, no wonder we struggle with patience.
Exactly. It's like trying to bake a cake while also chucking eggs at the wall.
Okay, that's a visual, but you know what I mean. But then one source talked about how we actually have more control over those thoughts than we realize.
Oh, yeah, that distinction between voluntary and involuntary thoughts. We can't always control what pops into our heads, but we can decide what we do with those thoughts.
Like that thought substitution thing. Instead of letting those negative thought loops just run wild.
We can choose to replace them with something more helpful, which easier said than done, right?
Right. It's like, how do we actually put that into practice? Because, yeah, replacing a negative thought with a more positive one, it sounds great on paper, but...
Our brains don't always cooperate, do they?
Exactly. So where do we even start?
Well, one of the sources actually offered up a really simple suggestion. Go for a walk in nature.
Honestly, sometimes the most effective solutions are the simplest ones, aren't they? But, like, what is it about nature? Why is it so good at calming us down?
Well, it turns out there's a whole lot of science backing that up. When we spend time in nature, our heart rate and blood pressure go down. Those stress hormones like cortisol, they start to decrease. Even just our overall mood tends to improve.
So it's like hitting the reset button on our whole system.
Exactly. And that can be so helpful when we feel that impatience bubbling up. But beyond just finding ways to chill out a bit, the sources also talk about some more, I guess you could say, structured approaches to problem solving.
Yeah. Which makes sense, because if we're feeling overwhelmed or stuck, that's a surefire recipe for impatience, right?
Absolutely. One source actually laid out this 5-step framework, and it's all about taking a step back approach. First, you clearly define what the problem actually is. Then you gather as much information as you can about it. Only then do you start brainstorming solutions. Then you pick the best one and finally take action.
Okay, so instead of just immediately reacting, we're hitting pause and actually thinking things through.
Exactly. It forces you to slow down, engage that logic brain a little more, and consider the bigger picture. Which, honestly, sometimes the most patient thing we can do is nothing at all, at least not right away.
It's funny, right? Because it's like that saying, don't just stand there, do something. But in this case, it's more like, don't just do something, stand there and think.
Exactly. And, that actually ties into another really important point from the sources, which is about truly listening to understand, especially when someone else is talking.
Oh, yeah. One of those sources put it so well. Don't let your mind wander, but focus on each thing the other is saying to you. And I know for me, it's so easy to get impatient when I'm not fully present in a conversation.
Oh, 100%. Because if we're already thinking about what we're going to say next, or we're jumping to conclusions before the other person's even finished,
We miss out on so much, don't we?
we do. And then that lack of understanding can actually make us more impatient because we're not seeing the whole picture.
It's like we get so caught up in getting our point across, we forget that communication is a two-way street.
It is. And as that source pointed out, rushing that process often leads to misunderstandings, which just leads to frustration, which then,
Just breeds more impatience.
exactly, it's like this vicious cycle.
Oh.
But when we make that conscious effort to slow down, really pay attention, try to hear what that other person's
You
saying.
can break the cycle.
Exactly.
This has been so interesting. It really feels like we've been looking at patience in a whole new light today. It's not just about like gritting our teeth and bearing it, but actually about this really active process of cultivating understanding of ourselves and others.
And recognizing that it's not some kind of personality quirk that we're just stuck with.
Yeah,
It's something we can actively work on every single day.
it's true. Seeing it as a skill instead of just like part of your DNA or something, that's huge. And it takes me back to that project analogy.
Yeah, like we all have the capacity for more patience.
Right.
Right? It's just about recognizing when we're not being patient, those triggers and stuff, and then trying a different approach.
Exactly. And that brings us to the big question for everyone listening today. What's one small step you can take, like right now, today, to cultivate a little more patience in your own life?
Ooh, love that.
I mean, maybe it is trying out that nature walk we talked about. Or the next time you're feeling stressed, see if that 5-step problem-solving framework helps.
Or hey, even simpler. Next time you're about to fire off a reply in a conversation, take a beat, a deep breath. Really focus on what the other person's saying.
Such good advice, because ultimately patience, it's a journey. It's not like we just arrive at Patientville one day and we're good.
Right. It takes practice.
It does. But like anything else we practice, we get better at it.
We do. And those reward that feeling of being more at peace, stronger relationships, even just making smarter choices. It's worth it.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, this has been a fascinating deep dive. As always, thanks for joining us, and until next time.